4 hours have been here have gone by really fast. Quickly, we're going to cover introductions, and then we're going to talk about the shifts that have occurred in math, in particular around the standards. And then we're going to talk about some of those standards and the mathematical practices, and then we're going to talk about our new math curriculum. So I'm Danielle, I'm the principal here, and joining us today is Eve. I'm going to say who you are.
I need to be over there.
It's easier if you come over here.
Yeah. Perfect. Hi.
I'm going to let you talk about me.
Okay, so Eve is one of our district partners. So she works with a company called Achievement Network. And a few years ago, Bellevue and Achievement Network partnered together really with the focus of improving student outcomes. And in the very beginning of the partnership, we were looking at some literacy practices, and then we shifted to look at math practices. And our previous curriculum, so the schools that were full partners right in the beginning, who were like piloting the partnership, did a study of the math standards and then looking at our old math curriculum, which really helped highlight why we needed a new math curriculum. So I'm going to give you like the condensed short version of what teachers went through, starting with the shifts. So when I first started teaching, the standards that we used in Washington State were called the ELERs, the educational, academic, something or other, right? And they were, and then like many states, we adopted the Common Core state standards. So we're part of a large group of about 30 states out of our 50 plus-ish states that use the Common Core standards. So the big shift was about focus. So really helping focus in for each grade level, what are the expectations, both content and practice. The other big shift was coherence, which is thinking about an entire scope and sequence from, I don't know if it's pre-K, but kindergarten, all the way through 12th grade. And then to me, one of the biggest shifts was around rigor. And there's kind of defining what rigor meant, and that there is conceptual understanding, procedural skill, fluency, and application. Sometimes we think of rigor as quantity and correct answers, so really moving away from that. There are some key focus areas by grade level. They cover a lot, but then there's in certain grade levels, so kindergarten through second grade, it really is addition and subtraction and place value. So building that understanding of which position the digits are in, what that actually means, and then really building problem solving skills. And then in third through fifth grade, it moves to multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions, which fractions are hard. Hola. And then looking at the concept, the skills, and problem solving. And then as we get on into the older grades, getting into ratios, proportional reasoning, algebra, and it keeps going on and on up through there.
But you see some really cool patterns of looping. Like there's a really clear second to fourth grade loop, a really clear third to fifth grade loop, and a really clear fifth to eighth grade loop. And so as your kids go through, you start seeing some cool
connections.
Overlapping. Yeah. Sorry.
No, this is this is why you're here. All good. Yeah. As an educator, one of the new pieces, because as long as I've been teaching, there's been standards we've had to teach towards, right? But a newer piece with the Common Core, it wasn't just around the content standards. It became around what kind of practices that we wanted kids to engage in. So there's 8 mathematical practices. And this slide, the font seems a little bit, well, maybe it's just on my computer. I'm going to turn this way. Right? So one of the skills and the practices that we want them to engage in is making sense of problems and persevering through them. And it's really intentionally using the words making sense and persevering. So the focus isn't find the right answer. And then another one is reason abstractly and quantitatively.
Can you give an example of what you mean by some of these statements, making sense of problems and persevering through? What is that in a practical way? Given a problem, how are they making sense of this?
And I think actually that is the first start, is to give a problem without really telling them how to do it. And so the first step is like, what is happening in this problem? What are they asking for? What's missing? What other information? What do you want to try to start it? Do you want to draw? Do you want to have manipulatives? Is there something that we've been learning about that you could use to help solve this problem? Our prior curriculum used to set it up as we call it gradual release, where the teacher would demonstrate and model how to solve it. Then we would have guided practice. We would do it together, and then they would do it independently on their own. The people who wrote the Common Core Standards, who also wrote the Illustrative Math curriculum, I was like, that kind of modeled learning works when you're teaching somebody how to decode and read. But it doesn't always have the same application where you're trying to teach somebody about mathematical reasoning, right? And so they actually kind of flip it. It's really, we throw the problem out, let kids think about I don't know what's happening on here, or I have some ideas, I might try this. And then they have time to talk with their peers to gather more ideas. And then they get to sharing out, even if they're don't have an answer or they don't have an idea, but kind of share what they've been thinking about the problem. And then it's a very challenging teacher skill, but pulling together to get the ideas generated from the peers about how to 1 or 2 or 3 ways to solve that problem. So to me, it's almost opposite. We're starting with the kids, and they add their peers, and then you bring in the teacher. And that's one of the adjustments in adopting the new curriculum. And that speaks to this first mathematical practice. Right? Kids really early on, I say humans really early on, kind of decide I'm good at this or I'm bad at this, right? Or I'm smart at this or I'm not smart at this. And we're trying to really flip that thinking on its head, is that sometimes, yes, things might come easier, so fast, you've learned it so fast you don't realize you've actually learned it. That has nothing to do with how smart or not smart you are, right? Because just because something takes you more time, effort, energy, perseverance to learn it, that's not an indication of your smartness, right? So, and then with reason abstractly and quantitatively, I think about the kinds of conversations kids have about a story, right? About the theme or about the main characters or how they change. I don't know if students are as accustomed to talking about their mathematical thinking, right? And fractions. That there's we use a lot of fractions in our everyday life, but it's really hard to make the connection between this abstract concept of fractions to what do you do with the numbers, right? So for instance, there was a donut in my office and some students wanted to share it. I was like, well, if we were to break it up into equal pieces, what fraction would you each get? Right away, they were like, 1/4, because there's 4 of us, right? But if I was like, well, what's 1/4 plus 1/4, with the donut, oh, that's half the donut. But then if I just put 1/4 plus 1/4 in equation, usually the most common first exposure is you get 1/8, right? So really trying to make the connection between real world mathematical applications and then connecting to the numbers. Constructing viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. That's about analyzing. So sometimes what happens is oh, so-and-so is smart in math, so they got the answer, we don't need to talk about it anymore. But really getting accustomed to analyzing and explaining our reasoning. It's probably one of the biggest things. So lots of kids like to say, I just know, right? Model with mathematics, using appropriate math tools. The other one is attend to precision. So when I think about, there's something with second grade and sloppy writing. I see some nodding. That's yep. And so using some tools like graph paper or just a visual, does this look neat? And then also being precise, here's my first step, here is my second step, knowing where that flow goes. And then look for and make use of structure. It's getting into some like predictability, into some patterns. I'm trying to find a concrete example that's not algebra. You know?
Area models.
Oh,
So
very
like
good.
an area model with tiles versus an area model. Yeah.
Perfect. Then to like the real life application, like we were talking about perimeter and area with third grade, the perimeter is the fence around the backyard and the area is the grass in the backyard. You know, thank you. And then look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. So it's like the foundation for understanding some of the different rules, if you will. So like when you're doing addition, you can switch the order of the digits, and you'll still get the same answer. So 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. And I think it also helps when we talk about the order of operations. Right? We'll have different acronyms for that. So then in thinking about math programs, there's kind of like 5 different areas of rigor, right, which are represented by these different shapes up here. A lot of previous math programs might have a larger percentage on 1 or 2 aspects of rigor, but not all 5 aspects of rigor.
I think an example would be like the math workbooks that I had when I was a child. It was like a lot of practice of like practice addition facts, and then there would be 2 word problems in the bottom. And so, right, so that focus is like on fluency and problem solving, but it's ignoring the conceptual understanding, the application.
One more visual. So kind of like just what you said. So on our previous math expressions curriculum, there was much more that the gray is the procedural, right? And I think about division, like there's like the big 7, like you taught kids a couple specific strategies, but really working towards procedural and computational fluency. And a little bit of application and a little bit of conceptual. Right? In our new math curriculum, which is why it looks very different when you look at the workbooks, right, is really trying to balance and really build conceptual understanding, application, and procedural. So there's a lot more expectation of peer coaching and explaining your thinking and analyzing and being able to have, I mean, different teachers call it different things, but we call it like number talks or strategy talks. So all 5 aspects are important. We do want computational fluency. We just want it to be more imbalanced. And we find that kids' long-term success in math is the greater conceptual understanding they have when they're younger, the more likely they have success further on in math. I think about myself as a math learner. Oh, wait, that's the next slide too. Math moments. Everybody has feelings and experiences linked to math, both positive and negative. And sometimes we have really strong feelings. And that comes out like as parents and as teachers, as well as we're supporting our kids in work, you know. And I remember thinking that, you know, like math wasn't my strongest suit, you know, because I had to work at it, you know, to understand it. And I remember, you know, in calculus in high school, it was just, I just had to memorize the equation and do that, right? So I think I had like the procedure down, but I had no idea what I was doing. And then when I was at the U, and I remember being in a math class and calculus, and I was my lowest grade ever. And I was like, okay, I still need a quantitative symbolic reasoning credit at the UW. And I thought this calculus class covered it. No, calculus was a natural world credit. It's like, wait, there's nothing natural about calculus. But so then I moved to a statistics class, right? You know, and we had to find the area under curve. And I'm pulling out this like complicated calculus equation. And then it was so much more real world. It was more like a bell curve and like percentages. And I just remember being a little bit blown away, like, oh, yeah, that's. And then when I took a elementary math course for teachers, that's actually when I was like, wait, I think more abstractly. Like, oh, there's abstract thinking in math, quite a bit of abstract thinking in math, not just how successful you are at memorizing the equation or the algorithms. So we all have feelings. And in many years of working with students, there are some students who get them like the memorization of multiplication facts so quickly, and they have this confidence, and it's so much fun to see. And then you give them a word problem, and then they kind of like the self-esteem gets shaken up a little bit, right? And so we want to go back to that first practice, mathematical practice of like persevering and reasoning. So take that strong knowledge you have, and how are you going to apply it and begin to tackle this problem?
So how do you do that for, you said there's multiple different ways of tackling a problem.
Yeah.
So some are going to do it one way, some are going to do it another.
Mhm.
And I assume it's changing and evolving over time, because I remember with the older one, he would do something one way and we'd be like, but we need to do it this way. But this is the right answer. How do you tackle somebody that just, they get it one way and they don't want to, they may not want to do it the other methodology?
So in our new curriculum, we're not as focused and or dependent on always using the same strategy, right? So hopefully we don't have that, no, you can't do it this way. But what we are encouraging students is once they find, or when they have one strategy that works for them, being able to use that reasoning and that justification for that strategy, and maybe using a second strategy to back up their first strategy, or to check their work, so it's about flexibility of thinking, not saying you can't do it your way, we have to do it this way.
Can I share a concrete example?
Yes.
So in second grade, number lines are introduced as a tool for solving addition and subtraction. Well, actually, but when they're doing double digits, they lean hard into that in the beginning. Some kids are like, this isn't efficient. Like, I know how to like carry a one, I'm good. Like, why am I doing this? When students start learning decimals in fourth grade, number lines come back as a more concrete strategy when numbers get more complex. You also see things like that with partial product and partial quotient modeling. The reason they start by drawing all those like squares and lined up boxes and everything is because once they get to 8th grade and they're doing algebra, that algebraic modeling comes back. And so it's not necessarily the most efficient strategy for solving what they're solving at the moment, but it's a great strategy to kind of tuck in their back pockets. So is it important that they do it all the time and that that's their method of doing it? Absolutely not. Is it a great thing that they know that that is a strategy in their toolbox to use if and when they need it? It's amazing. So
Okay.
It's kind of a balance, right?
So here are some sample tasks. So in the purple box is the standard for 4th grade. Okay.
Sorry.
Nope, it's a long standard. So explain why a fraction, AB, is equivalent to a fraction n times A over n times B, by using visual fraction models with attention to how the number and size of the parts differ, even though the two fractions themselves are the same size. Use this principle to recognize and generate equivalent fractions. So, there's not a pen here. Basically, it's saying that 1/2, we want students to be able to explain that 1/2 is equivalent to or the same as 2/4, 4/8, 5/10, right? And that's what
you multiply the numerator and denominator by
yeah, and using a visual model to explain that. So then in the yellow boxes, you have task A and you have task B. Which task is more aligned to the standard in the purple box? So the first task is comparing a rectangle below and which fraction is shaded, and then the second rectangle below, which fraction is shaded, and use the pictures to explain why the two fractions are equivalent. And then task B says find the equivalent fractions and has 14 different fractions that it wants you to find the equivalent fractions for.
It's easier to explain the visual one.
Yeah, and it specifically calls out in the standard using visual models to explain why. So that's what we mentioned earlier when we we're talking about the workbooks, right? It's about the quality and the alignment of the task to the standard versus the quantity, right? So task B is very much procedural and into some computational fluency, where task A is about reasoning and explaining, and they're both the same content of equivalent fractions, right? So that is kind of one of the biggest shifts from our old curriculum math expressions to our new curriculum illustrative math.
Right? And task A is from illustrative math.
Yeah.
Question 11 in task B, does that say 1/2 equals something over 17?
I think it's supposed to be 12.
Okay, because I was going to
Yes.
say, why? No,
That
because
doesn't work.
no, 8.5, what is our fraction?
Yes.
I think the other cool thing is, like, this really shows the arc of understanding of how we want to build a really solid foundation of conceptual understanding for our students. Because ultimately, yes, we want them to generate equivalent fractions, but task B does that in isolation, whereas task A builds that really strong foundation. So hopefully when my kid, unreal, but is helping me cook, you know, they can grab the 1/4 cup and get 2 of them if he knows that he needs a half a cup of something, or, you know, things like that. So we are driving towards that fluency, which I think is a question that a lot of families have had of, you know, but don't we want them to be fluent in this? Absolutely. We just want a really strong foundation for that fluency.
The other piece that has been really helpful for our educators is really understanding the shift in the standards, right? Because there's, especially in elementary, where there are standards in so many things, like to have one human understand every standard across all the subject areas is quite daunting. And so that's why another advantage of a new math curriculum is it really highlights for our teacher teams in each unit which lesson to kind of like sit down and talk about. It gets all the major standards for that unit. And so it's designed to also support teachers and supporting kids. Because I think the previous standards were very content driven, and the new standards are a combination of content and practice. So, okay. So, like we've been saying, like what have you been noticing in the last year that we've had this new curriculum? There are fewer worksheets. The tasks are incorporating all of the different elements of rigor. Some tasks are conceptual, problem solving, procedural, fluency, or application. Sometimes what happens is in the classroom, there are more, sorry, it's just the bell for recess and lunch switch, in the classroom, there's more maybe conceptual and application problems, and then the homework might be some more procedural problems, you know, trying to balance. A lot more student-driven strategies, a lot more visual or manipulatives, and various strategies, not necessarily the standard algorithm. We are working towards the standard algorithm, and a very clear expectation to verbalize and write your mathematical reasoning. And also coming off of the pandemic, where we didn't have kids necessarily in classrooms like turning and talking to each other, we're finding doing a lot of reteaching about how do we turn and talk to each other. They're getting the social aspect of talking down really well. Really, really well. And we meet that need, you know. And so really working in our math communities on math dialogue, and really trying to insert like the disciplinary content language. And our students are learning math in Spanish. So there's a for some students that's an additional complex layer, right? And so you'll see that's where the visuals and the manipulatives really come in handy to be able to explain. And then the strategy of bridging between what this word means in English and what the word means in Spanish, right? Yeah, yeah.
They do in fifth grade. They still do math in Spanish, or they switch to English. I know during the when my son did it online, but they switched to English that year. But I'm not sure if they stuck with that or not.
There, I am not this year. The math is in Spanish,
Okay.
you know, but sometimes there's talk as we switch into SBA time and we're doing the practices because the SBA is in English. So those like practice sessions, kind of there is a switch into English, and then the STAR math assessment, sometimes they give that in English and sometimes in Spanish, sometimes accidentally because the tech switching the button, you know. What I find really positive is there is a lot of bridging back and forth between the two languages. And when kids understand the concept in one language, they can apply it in the other language. So as somebody who's a monolingual speaker, I'm just in awe. Okay. We often get asked, so what can we do at home that supports math? Playing games. Almost all games have some aspect of math, you know, in them, and then being able to share mathematical reasoning. So I think with some of our early learners, games like Candyland, where you're talking about colors and shapes and the patterns, you know, how many more oranges, you know, the square oranges. To games like Go Fish and Uno, or even the card game Speed, which you're trying to figure out which, like the order of the numbers, you know, and yeah, cribbage, yes.
I'm looking for blackjack.
Yeah.
That makes me feel good.
Yes. Yes. Yep. 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 And then discuss and talk about math in daily life. This part at first wasn't as natural to me as a parent, and it's become, especially then teaching, like, well, I got to practice what I preach, right? And so some of the big areas are cooking and gardening for me. Not that I'm a great gardener or cook, but there's a lot of math in both of those. And then thinking about transportation, like distance and time. I don't know if we've been on any road trips. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? You know?
40 of us, unlike mine, sits in the back seat and sees the speedometer and tells me exactly how many miles over the speed limit I'm going.
Uh-huh.
And we pass the speed limit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
really
helpful. Good.
It is.
Good.
Really
A good way to learn percentages as well. You can say, oh yeah, you're like to go 10% over and you'll get 20.
Yeah. That'll be your next question to him. And then colors, shapes, patterns, problem solving, and money, which given the more we have like credit cards or, you know, PayPal, Venmo, all of those things, sometimes like concepts of money are less familiar. So, and then we have the computer adaptive math programs. This year it's called Imagine Math. And sometimes, like when you take the Imagine Math, like the initial assessment to get in, the levels, because it's supposed to adapt to how you're doing. So sometimes we might need to adjust that. And then this last link here is, let's see if it will go. There is, so Illustrative Math is the curriculum that we bought. The publisher that we purchased it from is called Imagine Learning. Imagine Learning has very robust resources from a school side and perspective. And it is, they're committed to fully fleshing out the Spanish, right? Making sure all the resources are available in Spanish. And then the other thing that's coming is sort of like some things that parents can easily access at home, right? It's not fully available yet. There is another publisher called Kendall Hunt that publishes Illustrative Math as well. We chose not to purchase through Kendall Hunt because they didn't have the Spanish resources available. But for families, Kendall Hunt has free resources that are open for families. And so you can click in, it has it in English or in Spanish by whatever grade level. And it has like what units and then some fractions as numbers. So you get does a little explanation, and then there's some ways to practice it and how you can talk about it at home, right?
Those questions are my favorite part of just knowing what questions I can be asking to help people with practice at school, like how we get engaged in that.
Yeah. So I will put this resource link in the next newsletter coming out next week. But it is a little bit confusing explaining the publisher and you know, that purchasing. Are there any math related questions? Okay. Are there any other questions? Puget Sound Energy, we're still waiting for them to light up the signs. And our ribbon cutting ceremony was fantastic. I just want to thank everybody for helping out. It was a lot of fun. And nobody inappropriately parked on 151st, so our neighbors were very happy. So thank you. Woohoo, good job. We're in the middle of a fundraiser. So this is the first time we have connected with this company called Apex, and it is a Glow Remix fitness party. There's things that are kind of like a walkathon where you can do a flat rate donation or you can donate per fitness move. There are every kid gets different participation prizes, and then next Friday is the big Glow Remix party that occurs during the school day. So we had colleagues, because they did a similar Glow Remix party like at Wilburton, was very successful, lots of fun. So the kids all get glow sticks, and it is definitely a party. And they definitely get a workout. So, there are different leadership lessons from the company. And so they do quick little lessons on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So they go in the classroom for a few minutes and they're talking about care or leadership or adapting or flexibility. So it is a good reminder of many of the things we've been teaching kids so far. And we're also working out some kinks because it's brand new for all of us. But Tara Jones did say, like, if we have questions, we could email her. So, anything else? Is there anything? I know there was a yes or no. Yes, no, we're not live streaming. Yes, we are.
No, we got 4 people viewing, but
awesome.
No questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, happy April Fool's Day, a day early tomorrow. It is kind of nice having April Fool's Day not be on a school day, but we do enjoy messing with kids sometimes too. So I think we'll get there. You guys have anything else?
I've been hearing a lot lately about the